Companies will happily invest tens or hundreds of thousands of pounds in software to do amazing things. They will not pay to prep or cleanse the data beforehand.
Welcome to the World of Procurement podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Barnes, and today on the World of Procurement podcast, we have Susan Walsh, the classification guru, the data queen herself, coming on to talk about how we can improve supplier data, or just in general, procurement data, just how to get it right, and how someone like Susan, someone external to your procurement teams, may be able to come in and just look at things a little bit differently, give you a different perspective. And she also gives you some really good tips on how to do it yourself within your organization, and also gives you a few clues, a few tips on just good practice overall, and why you probably shouldn't leave this to as one of those exercises that your procurement teams undertake each year. Enjoy the podcast. The World of Procurement podcast is brought to you by Icarus Consultancy. Icarus Consultancy specializes in procurement, supply chain, commercial contract management, mostly in the defense and aerospace sectors. Now, we believe in just making things simple. Let's try and remove the complexity, the jargon, and let's engage your suppliers with a bit more thought. Let's engage your internal stakeholders with a bit more thought and consideration for what they need to do. We just make things personable. We like to make things simple and make micro changes that give you big results. Check us out at icarus.uk.com.
Yeah, just to get started then, Susan, like obviously your specialty is data and doing wonderful things with data.
Yes.
I mean, how would you define good supplier data from sort of a perspective of like a procurement department or even just any business?
Well, I would say that I rarely see good data within a procurement department. But for me, it would be accurate, it would be organized, it would be consistent, and it would be trustworthy. Whoever's using it has to be able to trust that it's right. Yeah,
definitely. That like you can make a good acronym potentially.
Yes,
I like that.
Let's do that.
You just said it's rare when you find those things. Yeah. And is that just because procurement professionals aren't that interested in data, or they don't know how to navigate it? Like, what's your view?
So I've learned that it's not just a procurement issue, it's a company-wide issue. Companies will happily invest tens or hundreds of thousands of pounds in software to do amazing things. They will not pay to prep or cleanse the data beforehand, and they see it as an unnecessary cost. But actually, it's a real investment, because if you don't get your raw data right, that amazing expensive software that you've bought will not get used. It will give you the wrong results. It will give you the wrong information, and then you'll have to invest more money to fix it.
So this is that sort of dirty data going
in,
and
rubbish
really
in, rubbish out.
Results.
That's the polite version.
What other benefits do you get from sort of good data? Like, what's the importance of it from that perspective? Like, what else does it give you?
Well, I think the most important thing that people will want to hear is that there will be cost savings in terms of the time spent by your team working on the data, and also the ability to actually look at your data and find opportunities to make cost savings. And in some cases, it could be significant.
Definitely. I mean, do you see that when more so from the traditional sort of category sort of models, where you've got maybe multiple spends in certain areas? Let's go with a simple, like, your stationery. Like, if you're ordering like a stupid amount of fountain pens over biros, like, you can look at the data if it's clean and see, biros are 1/10 of the price of a fountain pen.
You can do that. You can also maybe discover that you have 50 suppliers that you're buying biros from and you didn't realise. And there could be a massive price range within who you're buying from. So, it could be anything from, say, I don't know how much biros cost, but it could be anything from like 10 pence up to £1. There could be that much of a difference, and for the same thing. Rationalising your suppliers, negotiating a better rate, and getting a price for that. But then another issue that I help my clients with is is actually checking that they're buying on contract, because a lot of them still just go rogue and buy somewhere else, even when they know they're not supposed to. You were supposed to use supplier ABC, and but we use supplier XYZ for something else, but they also sell pens. So let's just buy our pens from XYZ, even though they're twice the price of the pens that we've got on contract with supplier ABC.
If you're not actively putting out that supplier data, spend data, you're never going to, for one, pick that up.
No,
that's even happening potentially if people. It's kind of that rogue spend, isn't it, as well, that you can keep an eye on.
It shines such a light on so many different areas, and I don't think people realise the power that classifying your data, not even classifying, but sometimes just normalising it and organising it in a way that you suddenly see what's going on and you never realised before.
What would your recommendations be to any business if they kind of want to try and tidy up their data, try and get it in a good state on their own without, say, going to someone like you who could definitely elevate it once maybe they've done something?
I mean, it's possible. I think that a lot of teams and people find that there's just not enough hours in the day to fit it all in. You would have to make sure that you dedicated some time to it. Get to know your data as well. So I think a lot of people are scared of data, especially if it's big file. It's just a lot of text and numbers. It doesn't really mean anything. But after a day of working with someone's data set, I can really read the data, so I can start to tell when something doesn't look quite right. So if you're looking and working with your data on a regular basis, it's much easier to pick up those things that don't look quite right and fix them, rather than sitting down once a year to do it.
The message really would be, don't just pick it up as a once a year
definitely not.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of get to know, like you say, you get to know your data when you look at it. You get to see those abnormalities in your data sets if you're looking at them often. But if you're just picking up, once every year, you kind of got to, work out what's good data, what's bad.
Yeah, you're effectively starting over each year. I would recommend that, depending on the volume of data that you're dealing with, monthly or quarterly should be how often you should be maintaining and checking your data.
So the sort of do-it-yourself concept would be always do it, get familiar with it, and that's it really, isn't it? Just always be thinking about data as well.
And it can be done in just Excel. So you absolutely don't need to learn how to code. You don't need to learn how to do fancy macros or anything like that. I have very simple examples, and I will admit it's not the easiest thing to do, and it's very time consuming, but it absolutely can be done in Excel, so anybody can do it.
I'll vouch for that, having done various contract management activities and spend purely in Excel, because that's all I had available to me in those companies. So I'm with you on that, definitely. So we covered sort of the do-it-yourself as a business. I mean, what do you go and do when you get a new client, when you go into a business? What is it you look to do? Because obviously you're way more experienced than the average sort of procurement professional, and just looking at data, where most procurement people want to be focused on the next negotiation or getting an RFP out, or doing the sexier stuff, which for them anyway, unless you're
I'm
a bit more
doing the
of
sexy stuff
analysis.
For me, in my world.
That's it.
Because I fell into data by accident. I've only ever worked within classifying procurement spend data, so I know what they need the data for. I know how they're using it, so I know how it should be classified. A lot of my clients have never classified their data before they come to me, so I'm a really good kind of entry point for them. It's not they're not having to learn a big fancy system. They're not having to, learn anything new, because I'm going to do it for them, and then they can progress from there. So I have worked with clients who only have a supplier name, to clients that have supplier name, invoice description, and I can do something with all of that. So the first thing I do with any file is I normalize the suppliers.
What does normalize?
So or standardize. So if you've got say PricewaterhouseCoopers, you've probably got PwC, P.W.C, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Price Space Waterhouse Space Coopers. So I'll put that all into one PwC column. under normalized. Same with IBM, I.B.M, IBM Inc, IBM Limited. And quite often I'm dealing with global data, so you will have different variations within different countries. So you can, I think one of the clients that I normalized data from, I knocked a couple of thousand suppliers out of their list just by normalizing. So yeah.
Wow. That's
it
powerful.
really is.
Yeah.
And so that's really helpful, because then you initially straight up get a true picture of what you're spending with each of your suppliers. Then you get a true picture of how many suppliers you actually have. And then it's much easier to classify as well. That saves me a lot of time, because I'm not having to do 20 individual companies. I'm doing one all under the same grouping. That's the first thing I do with any file. I then classify the data, and I can either classify to an existing taxonomy or the UNSPSC, or I can customize one. And I've done all of that for my clients. I've worked with ProcHE as well, within the education sector. And when we talked about just supplier level, that was 90 countries. So almost as many different languages that I had to deal with. I'm not going to pretend it was the easiest file to work on. But from that data, just supplier data, that client now knows that they have 1,000 consultants on their books globally. So they're going to now work to rationalize that down. Some people might think that they don't have enough data, or it's never, there's always enough. It just depends on the amount of detail you have.
Even if a company, like you say, some of them only have the bare minimum data, like you say, you can still find a way to do something with that data to give them results from that.
It still tells you a story. And then on the flip side, you've got the clients that have almost too much detail. And, I can go down to that pen, pencil, paper level if you really want to do a deep dive. And I've got a client that I've just been working with, and they didn't have a taxonomy. They didn't have their data classified previously. So I've built a customized taxonomy for them because of the industry they work in. They have some quite specialized spend. So using something like the UNSPSC wouldn't give them proper reporting, because you have to think about your taxonomy as something that's going to filter up into your charts and your reporting. Yeah. So it's really important to get it right at that stage so that you have the right reporting information.
I think that's a really good point that you've moved to there. I mean, the whole point of getting good data is there so that you can report up to the most senior people within a business to allow them to make decisions, really. And I mean, say with that client that, a bit niche, or they needed a different solution, like how is it you work out those sort of taxonomies of like how to classify the data? Is it just sitting down with them and having that conversation about how they report, what they need to report on, and then
I find out what they're looking for, then I'll take a sample of the data and I'll classify that and build a taxonomy from scratch. I'll then send that back to them, get some feedback. They'll make some changes, and then that can be applied to the rest of the data. And normally when I speak to clients, they don't really know what they want until they've seen the first draft of a taxonomy. And then they think, oh, actually, we want this in. No, we don't want that. Can you change this? So they really need to see it visually, but you can't build a taxonomy until you start working with the data.
And I think you touched on a good point. Like most businesses really don't know what they want. Like I've spoken to senior people in organizations, and they've been running the same reports for 10 years on the same data sets that just get built up upon.
Yeah, I love showing them the possibilities. And quite often they'll say to me, oh, what can you do? And I say, well, I can do anything you want. You need to know roughly what kind of direction you're going in. I don't think there's enough time dedicated to the data side, and probably not enough experience either.
Yeah, I think you're probably right on both of those. There's not the perceived time, or people or organizations don't manage their time well enough.
And it's scary for some people. And it's really scary.
Yeah.
Trust me, it's not about numbers. I'm terrible at maths. It's about patterns and trends within the data. If I can do it, anyone can do it.
I kind of just got one last question I really wanted to ask, and this is a bit of a sort of more technical and nerdy in terms of what is it you use to build this data? You said you can do this on Excel if you really have to, sort of, your last resort sort of thing. What sort of software platforms do you use?
I'm using Omniscope, and that is a data modeling and visualization tool. So not only does it help me merge files together and deduplicate and do all that good stuff, But then I can manipulate the data while I'm working on it in a way that makes it really easy for me to pick up on errors, mistakes. It makes it easy for me to classify. And then right at the end, it also produces some great charts and visualizations as well.
Thanks so much for kind of sharing that sort of that insight into the data world. I think so many people listening will suddenly have a far better appreciation for what actually needs to happen.
I hope so.
I certainly have. And I mean, I've seen your content and I've spoken to you before, and yeah, I mean, I work with data as well quite often, but I don't work to it anywhere to this extent. And I can see already in my mind, just chatting to you, like how many more benefits organizations could get from having good data.
If I can get just people to start thinking about it and its importance, then my job is done.
Definitely. Awesome, Susan. Well,
thanks very much
for coming onto the podcast. Really appreciate it. Hopefully we can have you on sometime, maybe for part, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, 5,
mini-series.
However, keep talking about data. That's it. Awesome, Susan.
Great.
Susan delivered so much value in this podcast episode, just talking all things data, supply data, how businesses can radically improve their data sets by implementing small changes, by looking at data often, by learning to understand their data. And when abnormalities arise, that they know it's an abnormality because they know their data. Their data talks to them. It's fascinating to listen to the way in which Susan describes data, looking at patterns. It was a very insightful conversation, and I really urge you to go and check out what Susan is doing. You can find her on LinkedIn. Check out her website. All the links are in the show notes below. I'll see you very soon, my friends. Goodbye.